Thank you very much. Greetings from across the globe. Really, it's about 12:20 here in the morning, but I'm still awake, and hopefully can inspire you to think about things a little bit differently. So I am going to share my screen here. So just can you see my screen? Just raise your hand if you can see my screen. Okay, cool. All right. So the title of this talk is Discipline Disruption. And because I feel the status quo needs to be challenged in nursing, not only in the United States, but across the globe. And I'm going to give you some examples. When we talk about nursing practice in the United States, we talk about the academic world, where we prepare nurses. We talk about the practice world, where we hire nurses and nurses take care of patients. We talk about the regulatory world, and like Dr. De Silva said, every state in the United States has a different set of rules. All right, and it's really very challenging. So we talk about regulatory, and we also talk about the research and evidence-based practice component of nursing practice. And no matter where you're from, those four pillars are important. For this talk, because of time and because of the complexity of regulatory issues across the globe, I'm going to focus primarily on education and practice. So when you hear the word disruption, I don't know how comfortable you are with that word in your practice, in your school. But in order for innovation to occur, in order for us to move forward, someone has to disrupt. But it cannot be a chaotic disruption. It cannot be anything goes. There needs to be discipline associated with the disruption, just like this graphic shows. You know, there's still discipline here, but someone chooses to kind of go a different path, and we need that. And I'm going to encourage each and every one of you in this meeting today to challenge what doesn't make sense, to challenge the norm, to challenge the conventional way of thinking, and really think about, could we do this better? Could we do this different? How better could nurses contribute to the care of patients? How better could we train and prepare nurses? So that's the disruptive piece. All right. It's chaotic, but that's okay. In our master's program in innovation, we talk about being comfortable being uncomfortable, because a lot of some of the things I have to say are very uncomfortable, but that's okay. That's how we get better. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is practice readiness. This is a huge issue. It's a huge issue in the United States because when nurses graduate from school, they're not ready to practice. And we take between 6, 9, and 12 months to get them ready to practice. And the healthcare system cannot afford to pay that anymore. It's too much. And there's no other health profession that takes that long for a nurse or for a person to get ready to practice. When we talk about global nursing, we also are concerned about practice readiness. So whatever country you're going to go to, whether you're coming from Sri Lanka to the United States or you're going to the UK or whatever, you need to be practice ready. And how do we assure that? So there was a study that came out, and this was a United States study, and I'll give you the reference at the end, but I think it's most likely relevant in a lot of areas. But the practice of nursing, the practice nurses strongly agree that nursing curriculum should be standardized nationwide to give all nurses the same foundation based on evidence-based practice versus only 49% of the educators. So there's a gap. The educators think one thing, the nurses in practice think another thing. In the United States, we have no standard curriculum. Okay. We have boards that you must take. We have boards that in order to practice, but there's no standardized curriculum. We have governing bodies that make suggestions, but you can go to 10 different schools and get 10 different types of programs. That has to change. And I've been to other countries where things are much more standardized across the country. The next thing, we need to turn to tech, and Dr. De Silva talked about that. COVID forced us to go to tech. All right, whether we liked it or not, COVID forced us to move to technology. So 81% of educators believe incorporating tech into the classroom makes nursing education more effective versus only 68% of practice nurses. So we need to listen to what our constituents are telling us. All right, the educators think tech is good in the classroom versus only 68% of practice nurses. The last thing is on clinical judgment, and we talk about clinical judgment all the time. What is it? How do you measure it? Why don't some of our nurses have it? 74% of practice nurses don't believe today's nurse graduates have better clinical judgment than graduates from 5 to 10 years ago, versus only 46% of educators. Again, there's that gap. And I would bet if I did this across the globe, we'd find similar results. So there's this gap between what the practicing nurses think and what the educators think. And there is a gap in the readiness of nurses to practice. It's a big issue. Continuing with this study, a growing gap in prep perception. Nurse graduates are completely unprepared or minimally prepared. They had to answer this question. Practicing nurses, 38% agreed with that versus only faculty. So if the faculty are content with the way things are, nothing's going to change. And I don't know how many faculty we have in the room, but it's hard to move faculty against the against the grain with some things, because we get pretty comfortable. A decade makes a difference. Today's nurse graduates are less prepared to enter practice than those from 5 to 10 years ago. Practicing nurses say 66% say yes, 46 faculty agree with that statement. Again, there's a gap. Why is that? Why is there a difference over the years? And we're still trying to figure that out. And I've got some ideas down the road that I'll give you. The question was why nurse graduates are less prepared compared to 5 to 10 years ago. Faculty believe there's worse clinical judgment skills. Practicing nurses about 60%, and you can read the statistics here. So we have a problem, and I'm going to propose a couple solutions that how we're addressing this and how others are starting to address this that might stimulate some thought amongst your programs wherever you are. This is the reference, which is something that came out from the publisher Wolters Kluwer, Closing the Education Practice Gap. So we need a new paradigm, okay? And you know, the role of somebody that does a keynote is to really challenge you to think differently. And the new paradigm in the United States, and I think it's true in many countries, is we need to change the traditional model of nursing education to more competency-based. Because right now, many programs are not competency-based. And there's a lot of resources out there to do that, but we really need to become more competency-based, as opposed to, this is the textbook, these are the tests they do, they pass the test, they move on to the next thing. And that has to go away. So we need more competency-based education. The next thing we need is what we call this adaptive clinical model. And what does that mean? Well, if you think of traditional nursing school, all right, a nursing student enters at, let's say, their first course. And in that course, there's given objectives. And as the nurse achieves those objectives, that's it. But if that student has the ability to take it further, why limit their ability to go further by the course they're in? So what we're proposing is this adaptive model where we use technology to assess them, where we use virtual reality to assess them, to allow them to move along at their own pace. So now you may have some nursing students that graduate maybe in 3.5 years versus 4 years. Some may take a little longer. And we haven't figured this out totally yet, but this is our idea. So I think the new paradigm that I'm proposing here is this competency-based education and this adaptive clinical model. Okay. This next thing is that this is our extended reality lab. And just by a show of hands, how many of you are using extended reality in your education programs? Is anybody using? I don't see any hands. Maybe there are. But this is our lab, and we just received $1.5 million from the American Nurses Foundation to integrate extended reality into our undergraduate curriculum. This isn't the future. This is now. And we put 46 nurse practitioner students through 3 simulations in 4 hours. Can you do that in your sim lab? I don't think so. And they loved it. So by moving towards this technology, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody about it if you're interested. The headsets aren't that costly. The software is coming down in price, and the student experience is so much better. And there's no better way to assess clinical decision making than by virtual reality. This is virtual. We're also using augmented and mixed reality. So this, I think, is something we have to pay attention to and we have to embrace. The other thing that we're getting more into is teaching in the metaverse. You talk about a global university, you talk about a global nurse. What better way to get nurses from all countries together than to get into a space in a digital space in the metaverse and just hang out and chat and talk about issues and teach. And again, that's not the future, that's now. So this is the education piece. So practice readiness is extremely important. We know there's a problem with it and we need to address it. There are things we can do to address it with respect to competency-based education, adaptive clinical models, partnering with our practice partners, and as well as utilizing technology to our advantage because it's there and it's getting better and it's getting cheaper. So, and then the last thing we're doing is we've partnered with our College of Engineering to integrate machine learning and artificial intelligence to help with nurse decision making. So what the engineers do is pull electronic health record data into a system, and then nurses have to prioritize which patients they would see first. Just another way to assess clinical decision making to expedite their practice readiness. So so that's the academic piece. Okay. And again, we've agreed to do this. It's a 3-year grant. We don't have nearly as many undergraduate students as you do, but we have about 700 undergraduate students, about 60 faculty, and we're set to be up and running by the 3rd week in August. So we'll see how that goes. So so then I want to move into the practice standpoint. Okay. So we talked about academics. Now let's talk about practice. So the first thing is innovation. And I wish I was in front of you because I'd ask everybody to raise their hand, anybody that thinks they're creative and innovative to raise their hand. And in my experience, when I ask that question live, almost nobody raises their hand. And it's just the opposite. Nurses need to be at the innovation table. Nurses need to be driving the innovation that occurs in healthcare. Nurses did drive the innovation in healthcare during COVID, okay? But nurses need to be empowered to challenge the norm, to bring ideas forward, and then the system has to support that nurse and that nurse's idea to move forward. This is one example. We have maker spaces. We have 3 maker spaces that are called the Innovation Studio, where if a nurse or anybody has an idea, they can come forward and we help them. And in that space is tools and 3D printers and laser cutters and all sorts of different things. But for us to move forward, to create this global nurse, we have to be innovative, and nurses have to drive it. That's called democratizing innovation. We have to bring the tools and the expertise and the people that can make the decisions to the bedside to allow the nurses to innovate. I can't overstate that. That is probably one of the biggest things holding us back, is our inability to be nimble enough to innovate in the healthcare system. And nurses need to be a big part of that, because no innovation will move forward without nursing. I firmly believe that. The other thing we're studying is the relationship between a culture of innovation and well-being. There's this big focus on stress, burnout, resiliency in healthcare, and in the business literature, it's very clear that there's a relationship between a culture of innovation and well-being. And we want to understand that better. So that's the first piece. Innovate, ask questions. You have my permission. Hopefully you have the permission of the people that you work with, but please do. And if you want more information on that, I'm going to give you my contact information at the end. The next thing is, we really have to challenge the traditional care team model. And that means a few things. The first is, nurses need to practice to the top of their license, which means that we have to do away with the tasks that are not nursing related. We have to allow nurses to nurse. We have to allow nurses to move patients through the system. And that may mean bringing in alternative type people to lift and move and provide meals or whatever that is. But there is a lot of work being done now about what does that care team look like, and who should be involved in that care team, and what role does the nurse play in that care team, because the nurse is the only person that touches everybody else on that care team in addition to the patient. So the nurse needs to really rise to the top in this team. But we need to challenge traditional models of providing care, because at least in the United States, it's not sustainable. We have tremendous shortages of nursing in the United States, and it's not going to get better. I mean, we're looking at hospitals that are, you know, 3/4 down of their nursing staff that are relying on, you know, travel nurses. So we have to figure this out. There's a lot of emphasis on this across the globe, but this is so we need to innovate, and we need to really challenge the practice model. And the last thing is, we need evidence-informed care. We have to allow evidence to drive our practice, and we need to build not only a culture of innovation, but a culture of evidence-informed care, and nurses can drive that. Okay, because if we don't have that, we're not going anywhere. All right. So those are three things from the practice standpoint. All right, so we did the academic standpoint, we've done the practice standpoint. I could go on about the other two pillars, but in the interest of time, I can't do that. So then I just have to say one last thing, and then I'm going to close. So we have to, and as global nurses, we can make a difference here. But we have to move the healthcare system, which is a disease-oriented system. Okay, we have to move the healthcare system from a system of disease-oriented care, illness-oriented care, to a system of health. Okay, and how do we do that? Well, we do that through innovation. Where's my, there it is. So as nurses, that's one of the fundamental things we learn is health promotion and teaching self-care and helping patients stay well. And our healthcare systems today are really a disease care model, but we really need to shift the paradigm to a healthcare. And as nurses, we can drive that change, and we can do it through innovation, whether it's digital health or alternative models of care, or I mean, there's some wonderful models of things being done in Switzerland. I just read an article where in Switzerland, if you provide care to an elderly person, you get tokens, and you put these tokens into like a bank, if you will, that you can use when you get older. And what a wonderful way to number one, get younger people involved with the elderly, but number two, have some resources later on in life in the event that you need it. So I think this is extremely important. The World Health Organization thinks this is extremely important, and I think this is something that we have to embrace. So in conclusion, that's how you can get a hold of me. And finally, I hope I got this right. So here you are over here. Here I am over here. And it's just been an absolute privilege and honor to present to you all. I have a ton of admiration for the work that you're doing, and the fact that you pull off a meeting like this. I have no idea how many people are participating, but it's just wonderful to see. And again, just an honor for me. So I hope I got the right language. Bahoma Estudi, and peace. So thank you very much.